Health, Psychology, and Human Nature with André Sturesson. Hey friends, hope you're having a great day. Are you following me on Instagram and Facebook? Please go to Health, Psychology, and Human Nature on Instagram or Facebook, or both for that matter, to get the latest episodes, inspiration, and more. Please take a pause and go there. Also, if you like the episode, please share it with a friend, family member, or somebody else who you think might like it. Welcome back, friends, to Health, Psychology, and Human Nature with me, André Sturesson, a science-focused podcast where we explore, learn, and improve our lives together. Can the adult brain change for the better? In today's episode, the friendly and knowledgeable Michael Merzenich tells us all about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change. The physical underpinnings of the changing brain, what happens to the brain as it gets older, and brain training, and a lot more. Professor Emeritus Michael Merzenich have published more than 150 articles in scientific journals, some in Science and Nature, and he's also received numerous awards and prizes. An example is one of the world's top neuroscience prizes, named the Kavli Prize. He's also the brain behind BrainHQ, which is a brain training company, and the author of the book Soft Wired. Friends, I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Michael, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's nice to be with you, Andre.
It's nice to have you on, that's for sure. How's life over there right now?
Well, we're in quarantine, that we're in isolation a little bit, and but in a way, it's a time to for us to learn new things and to make new adjustments, and life is still fun and vital, and so everything is going well.
You seem to have quite an optimistic view of life. Is that correct, or?
You bet. Absolutely. I am optimistic about why wouldn't I be optimistic about life? I'm trying to be and living my life on a trajectory of continuous advance and improvement, and so should everybody.
Yeah, sounds good. I think it was Kahneman who said, saw some quote from him saying that people who are more optimistic, there's also research about them having, I can't remember exactly the benefit, but that there's benefits to being optimistic as well.
There is, and not to be disturbed too often by things that don't matter. That's a real important asset to carry into life.
For sure. All right. I know you're quite an expert when it comes to brain plasticity, and I think we should start off by talking about that. And I'm sure that there's people who doesn't really understand the concept or who have actually never heard about the concept. So I would like to start off by just asking the question that if the adult brain, can the adult brain actually change?
Of course, the brain changes as a function of use in everybody. That every time you advance it in ability, or every time you improve it or acquire any new ability, any new skill, that improvement is accounted for by brain remodeling, by brain change. Of course, the brain is also plastic, capable of change in a variety of other ways. Basically, it's analogous to your physical body. It's organically healthy as a function of how actively and how effectively it's being engaged. And at any point in life, you can advance its operational abilities. You actually change the operational characteristics of the machinery of the brain by use. And when you use the brain in a way that advances your ability, you're actually advancing that machinery. And you're actually improving, like you improve in the physical body, the way that your vascular support system supports it, the way you improve the overall health of the organ, just as you improve the overall health of the organ by exercising your body itself.
Very interesting. So
this is a great.
Sorry,
gift.
go ahead. So go ahead. Sorry.
I say this. Plasticity is a great gift. We have the capacity to change in a positive direction at any point in our life, continuously across the span of our life.
I think that's very interesting. So whenever, like, if we learn a new word, or like if we learn some new game, or if we're out in nature and we're walking around and perhaps we're climbing a tree, then our brain is actually changing with the function of the brain as well.
Andre, I love the concept of being out in nature climbing a tree. I just love that. I just love that.
You're missing it now, don't you?
That idea. But absolutely, of course. I mean, we acquire, anytime we acquire any new skill or ability, anytime we develop our abilities to a higher level, anytime we take on a serious path of improvement on anything we do, basically that improvement arises by, in a sense, further specializing our brain in ways that account for it, that enable it. And so, our brain is like a great factory. We're born with a great factory that hasn't really sorted out exactly what's going to be built within it. The machinery isn't in place yet.
Right.
And we actually grow that machinery by using our brain. And the operational person that we are has actually been created within us by brain use. And it's a continual work in progress. Because at any age, we can acquire a new skill, we can develop some new ability, we can take on something that really matters to us and improve on it a little more, and that is necessarily accounted for by a revision of the operational characteristics of the machinery that underlies that ability in our brain.
Right. Isn't it so that, like, if you are to learn like a new skill or something, then it has, like, physical changes in the brain have to occur for you to be able to learn something new and for the brain to be able to do something new?
People have studied this in literally hundreds and thousands of experiments in which they've basically trained an animal or a human to develop some new skill or ability, and then watched the brain change in ways that account for that acquisition or that improvement of that ability. So this is an experiment that's been conducted by scientists innumerable times. And we actually understand the rules that govern this change. We understand the processes that control this change. We understand the nature of the change in the physical operations in the brain. So this is a well-understood, continuous plasticity of the brain is now a well-understood aspect of brain function. You could say it's the brain's big trick. It changes itself as a function of use to the advantage of the owner of the brain. And we all have this, you would say, carry around this wonderful asset within our skulls and should be taking continuous advantage of it across the course of our lives, obviously.
Very, very interesting. And I mean, and I have a question about that also, because it seems like, as you're saying, like the brain is really malleable. Why is that? I mean, what do we get from having a malleable brain? We
get us, the person that you are. The self arises by massive schedule of self-reference in your operations and in your life. The operational person that you are, and your ability to adapt in an incredible way that you've adapted to all of the operational necessities of you being successful in your modern human environment. We were an incredibly adaptable species. We could live anywhere and sort out, solve the problems, learn how to use the tools. The operational person that you are was created by these processes. It was created by it. You're a product of them. And you're subject to continuous change and revision as required. So, I mean, it is you. This is the basis of you, yourself, and I.
Like, what would you say, like on a scale from 0 to 100, if 0 is like the brain can't change at all, and if the 100 is the brain really can change, like a maximum be able to change, like which number would you choose?
Well, the brain changes under control. So this is something to understand. When you're a baby, plasticity is substantially unregulated. The brain is changing itself as a function of what you're exposed to as a baby. But very early in life, the brain basically establishes control, and it only, in a sense, permits change when it matters to it. So there are a series of contingent conditions that have to apply for change to be enabled. So we understand those conditions. We understand how to control change following these rules. Again, I like to say that scientists across the last 50 years, primarily across the last 30 years, have clarified and have a good understanding of those rules. So the brain is not changing, you could say in an uncontrolled way. It's changing in a highly controlled way as a function of outcome and as a function of whether the brain is interpreting, the individual is interpreting the change in a sense to be good for itself. And so, I mean, we can talk about this more later, but I guess it's a somewhat complicated subject, how the brain is actually controlling change.
Right.
What you're doing has to matter to you for the brain to change. It has to be significant to you, to the brain itself, for change to be allowed. So you can have massive level of experience that the brain basically understands is not important to you. You can have a massive level of experience in your operations in which you never make an error, for example, or rarely make an error. Nothing changes in your brain because the brain understands that it doesn't matter. But when you're challenged at anything, when you're in the right mode, the brain is subject to large-scale change. And especially when it really matters to you, it changes itself on a large scale to your advantage. That's what it's up to.
I think that's very interesting. So the brain changes more when it feels like it's necessary, or that it feels like it has to, kind of, or that it's good for the brain. Then it's right. More being able to change.
There are some instances in which it's actually very strongly responding to things that aren't, you could say, necessarily necessary. For example, when it's surprised, it basically treats surprises in a special way because it has to basically define the valence of something that's unexpected or surprising. It has to know whether that unexpected or surprising thing, you could say, is good for it, could potentially harm it, could potentially be useful to it, is something it should be, concerned about.
Yeah.
So there are things that are not necessarily important to you that will generate a special memorable response in your brain that will record it. Brain will record it, will change itself with any such event.
Right.
But in general, when you're in a change mode, when you're in learning mode, the brain basically is controlling your advance by changing itself.
Right. I think I saw one interesting thing that you said in a presentation that you did, and you mentioned that the brain has the ability to become better, but it also has the ability to become worse, or it can change in a positive way and a not so positive way. Could you elaborate your thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. All of the processes involved are reversible. And this is very clear to us from the outset when we began to study these issues several decades ago. And it's just as easy to drive the brain in a negative as in a positive direction. So that's because, in a sense, the brain is specializing as a function of how you engage it. And when you follow the rules, it's easy to drive the brain to de-differentiate, that is to say, to change its ability to resolve what you're seeing or hearing or feeling, as it is to refine it. So I can quite easily, in fact, I have conducted such experiments in animal models. I can engage an animal in the use of its, like a small monkey, in the use of its hand, and destroy its ability to use its hand by training it. Turn its hand into a useless claw. I could do this to you because I understand the rules that are involved. I could easily destroy your ability to understand what I'm saying by training you. All of the processes that are controlling plasticity are reversible. So I can drive you, in a sense, north or south at will because I know the rules. Now, in general, the brain also relaxes in its characteristics in a period of non-use. So it takes a level of continuous, you could say, engagement or refinement. It's just like your physical body. If you don't engage your physical body to sustain your agility and to sustain its strengths and stamina and differentiation of your movement, it'll all slowly degrade. So too in your brain. And basically what's controlling this in your brain is that the brain is changing as a function of your ability to get the answer right. So it's a simple way to think about it. And when you begin to make mistakes in whatever you're doing, the brain relaxes its operational characteristics. It changes the machinery itself in a direction in which it slows down, and it basically looks more carefully to try to help you sustain control and get the answer right. So it has an incredibly wonderful ability to self-adjust so that in general, you get the answer right. You can perform the task, but you have to do it more slowly. You can basically perform the critical operation, but you have to do it under simpler conditions. And it's doing this basically to sustain our general operational ability. But on the one hand, it might be doing it with incredible facility in the young, healthy, vigorous brain. And on the other hand, it might be sluggish and barely managing to get through the day, you could say, in the old, tired, poorly exercised brain. So the brain plasticity, in fact, is and by the way, you never lose the power to change the brain from a brain that's going south to a brain that's going north. At any point in life, you can throw the switch and drive the brain back into a refining or improving or a healthward direction, because all of these processes are inherently reversible. They're constructed to be reversible.
I think what you mentioned before, just because I think a lot of listeners think that would be interesting to know more about when you mentioned that the experiment with the monkey and its hand, and you also mentioned our ability to hear. Could you tell us a little bit more about that you could train somebody or train a monkey to not to be able to use its hand, for example?
Well, let me talk about another experiment. Well, first of all, let me say that this is a common thing that occurs in a human life. Basically, it's a function of how you use your hand in human, and this is why the experiments were conducted. You can lose control of your hand. It's a condition called a focal dystonia of the hand, and it's not a rare condition. It occurs millions of times in affecting individuals in the world. Commonly, it's a plague of professional musicians. It commonly occurs in the workplace, and some people that have very intense and controlled uses of their hand. And basically, by how you engage the hand and things that you're really focused on or trying to use your hand in a positive way, it actually destroys your ability to control your hand because the brain is plastic. And you've, in a sense, violated the rules in a way that's driven your brain basically to degrade its representation of the details of what you're feeling as opposed to improve them. But let me talk about another simple experiment.
Sure.
So about 10 years ago, we looked at animals, and these were the brains of rodents, of rats. They're actually a Scandinavian rat, Norway rats.
Oh, Scandinavian.
Wild species of rat. And we looked at these brains of these rats when they were in the prime of life. And we looked at about 30 characteristics. These are physical and functional characteristics of the brain. And some of these things relate to brain function, and some of these things relate to brain health. So how effectively is the brain getting the blood that it needs or the oxygen it needs? How well is it protecting itself with its immune response? How well is the brain keeping separate the fluids from the blood from the fluids of the brain? How well is the brain? How fast is the brain? How accurate is the brain? How strongly is the brain connected? How powerful is the brain? How healthy is the brain? So we looked at these 30 things in an animal in the prime of life, and we looked at the same 30 things in an animal near the end of life. And we asked a simple question: how many of these 30 things are different? And the answer is all of them. 30 for 30. Everything is different. And then the second thing we ask, well, how many of these things advantage the older brain? I mean, older brains have been around longer. Presumably some things will be better. No, Nothing's better. The animal near the end of life, everything is in the degraded or struggling direction. Nothing is better. In every way, the young, vigorous, healthy brain is advantaged over the old, in a sense, tired and slowly dying brain. And then we ask the third really important question. Well, plasticity processes are reversible. How many of these aspects, how many of these 30 things that relate to the organic health of the brain or its functional powers or abilities are reversible? And the answer is all of them. All 30 are reversible. And in a rat, rats are not humans, but in a rat, almost every operational characteristics of the brain, almost every aspect of its physical health could be reversed to the level in which they were not distinguishable from the status that we saw in an animal in the prime of life. We did this experiment in the second way. It was actually conducted by my colleague, one of my colleagues that was involved in these experiments, Xiaoming Zhou, who is a professor in Shanghai. And basically what he did is he took animals in the prime of life, and he said, these animals are doing pretty well, but I'm going to train them in the same way. I'm going to refine their operational abilities in their brain now when they're in prime of life, in a sense, make them super rats. And now I'm going to look at the age in which these rats are expected to be close to the end of life. And now when he looked at those rats when they were at the close to the end of life, their brain were like the brain of an animal that was, let's say, would be equivalent to a human being, let's say 40, as opposed to 80. So a dramatic consequence of exercising the brain when the brain was young in ways that basically contributed positively to all of these same 30 factors that relate to its organic health and its operational powers. You know, your brain is just like your body. It needs exercise. And to the extent to which it's exercised and used in the right ways, it's vital. It's lively. It's full of it. You know, and just because we can't see it in the mirror, we have no, we don't consider brain health as an issue, but it is an issue. Now, people forever, in thinking about aging, they've talked about, well, what distinguishes the brain of an individual that's really that's healthier in an older age? And they say, well, people that are really healthy commonly have what they call cognitive reserve. Something in their earlier life has contributed to their being now healthier when they're older. Psychologists use the word cognitive reserve to describe that or to define that. All it is organic brain health. That's all cognitive reserve is. Your brain is like your body. If you don't take care of it, it's not fit. And you're in trouble. So there's no mystery to it. And most people, of course, don't think about their brain as something that really needs to be exercised. They don't think their brain is a subject of needing any particularly special attention. But it is in need of special attention. And you should be managing your brain health, just like you're managing the health of your body, of course. And you should be seeking to sustain a brain that is vital and alive and full of it all of your life. That's the goal in life. That is an important goal in life, because your brain is you. And if you're not sustaining a vital you, you're a damn fool.
One thing that I find quite astonishing as well, or not astonishing, but that I find important, is that it is the physical changes. I mean, that you also see the physical, the chemical changes, and the functional changes as well, right?
Right. That's really important, because all of this plasticity, we talk about it as people commonly think of their brain in terms of a quote mental operation. Well, it's all physical. And actually, when you advance your brain, and a number of these things that we measured in this list of 30 are physical. You know, they're the expression of particular chemicals that are critical for controlling change in the brain, or they're critical for actually controlling the growth processes in the brain that are associated with positive alterations in the brain and so forth. And they relate to things like the insulation on the wires of the brain, or the way, or the strengths with which the brain areas are connected one to another. And these are all physical assets. I mean, it's just like your body. You exercise it and it changes physically. It's not different in the brain. The brain is a physical organ. It's all chemistry and structure, and you're changing that chemistry and structure by use.
Interesting. And this super rat program that your colleague or the other scientist in Shanghai did studies about, like, what would be the human super rat program, so to speak?
Well, you would be thinking about issues of brain health across the span of your life. And naturally, what we do in the course of our life is we have a period in which we're advancing ourselves in childhood. And we're in a sense intensively engaging our brains, and we have a highly active, you could say, learning life. And to some extent, across the middle of our life, we spend much of the time in our life as users of skills and abilities that we've learned at an earlier age. Mm. We settle into our employment. We settle into the sort of regularities of an average modern life.
Yeah.
And we're no longer the active agent for change that we were when we were younger. And what a person should be doing is they should be a continuous active agent for change. They should be engaging their brain. And in the natural human state, you weren't allowed to relax on your laurels and say, okay, now things are not going to be serious anymore. Well, let's take it easy. In the natural way of things, life was a continuous challenge. Those challenges don't have to be distressful, or they don't have to be negative. They don't have to be. They can be. It can all be approached from a positive perspective. How can I grow my abilities? I think of in a common older life in a modern world. You think of yourself as contracting your abilities. It's like you're slowly moving down the funnel and limiting what you dare to do, or limiting what you do in life by these natural forces that simplify it and that reduce you to a simpler person operating in a simpler way in life, things that you can really manage in life. Well, you have the funnel upside down. You should be thinking how you can expand your ability, expand your understanding, expand your interest. I mean, wow, why would you ever accept personal constraint like that? That's crazy. That's like living your life going from a full screen television to a television that's about 2 inches across. Why would you do that?
Or a Game Boy, perhaps.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So, I mean, anyway.
So what you're saying, I'm just trying to get my head around this. So what you're saying basically is that you need to do things that really stretches you, kind of like maybe learn a new language,
not in a stressful way, Andre, in a joyful way.
Yeah.
In a positive way, because it's wonderful to grow in your ability and understanding of things, and the world is full of fun. The world is full of really interesting things that you've never really understood or never really been able to do, that you could know more about and that you could do more about. And there's another thing I'd like to emphasize about this, Andre, is that some people think that they're really doing pretty well. Maybe they're even exceptionally good or exceptionally capable at what they do. Maybe in their profession. Andre, we have brain trained some of the greatest performers in the world. We've trained an individual, we've helped an individual in brain training that's one of the highest figures in the world's smartest human contest. We've trained a great American football player, Tom Brady, who was the oldest effective quarterback in football. And actually, when he trained it began training using our strategies, he improved his ability and improved his play at the age of 39, and has been using these strategies ever since. We trained great football players in Europe. And so, I mean, everybody's improvable. That's my point. Everybody is improvable. Everyone can take what they do, what's important to them in life, to a higher level.
Right.
So it's not just about acquiring new skills or abilities. It's about taking all of those things that you are good at. Everything is improvable.
Right. So it's not so it's kind of not settling down and keep on improving always.
Right. In a positive, cheerful way.
In a positive way, yeah.
You don't have to think about these things as burdens or as, somehow.
Not everybody have to learn, I don't know, Russian, and that's even if you want to or not.
Yeah, right.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So it's very important to keep on doing, to keep on evolving, and to keep on learning things that you're interested in, and to keep on expanding on your abilities and skills and things you enjoy in life.
Right.
Right. And I know that you've been doing a lot of brain training, and you also have a company, and it's at least the program, I think, is called BrainHQ. Could you tell us a little bit about BrainHQ and your brain training in a nutshell?
Yeah, sure. BrainHQ was a company that was founded with the permission from the University of California, because usually a professor from our university who would translate what they do into the world to try to help people is loses their job position.
Yeah.
They have allowed me to do this several times as a professor and to retain my professorship. But anyway, its focus is on human health, and it focuses on aging. BrainHQ does. And basically, it applies training in forms that we know from studies in animals and in humans to be effective in driving changes in the brain that contribute to improvements of health and to improvements of the operational ability of the brain in a general way. So, one of the things that happens to brains that are degraded in their operations is they slowly disconnect and they slow down. So they're relatively sluggish in their operations, and they're imprecise in their operations. And they represent information in a form that is more difficult for the brain to record. We call that remember. And all of these things are subject to improvement by engaging the brain to change. So really what we're trying to do in the training strategies that we apply, we're trying to define where a person is at in their basic neurological abilities. It's neurologically focused as opposed to just behaviorally focused. And then we're trying to drive those operational characteristics of the brain in an improving and in a positive and a healthward direction. Or you could say this includes the kind of training that we would apply in a rat near the end of life to derive those operational characteristics, so they're like the operational characteristics of the brain in the prime of life. That's the same kind of approach. We're trying to change the physical and functional brain by exercising it. That's what BrainHQ does. And BrainHQ has been actually evaluated in about 150 published random assigned control trials. These are serious scientific trials in a variety of adult human populations and in a number of child populations of children that really struggle. These are people that have all kinds of neurological struggles, including people that are facing maybe a future of dementia or Alzheimer's disease and so forth. And a whole rich variety of individuals have been engaged in these forms of training, and have invariably been shown to be advantaged by it. Advantaged by it from the point of view of the indices of brain health and in terms of their operational abilities in the brain.
Right.
So it's if you just to make a more important point, Andre, if you just led your life, if you just live life in the right way, you never have to go to the brain gym, right? It's a little bit like if I have a really healthy physical life, I don't have to worry about going to the gym every day or several times a week to sustain myself or sustain my physical health. It's the same with your brain. If I but a lot of people haven't done that. And so it's really advantageous to them to go through a sort of jump start and to get their brain back in a healthward direction, but also, while they're doing that, to begin reconsidering how they are introducing, you could say, brain health practices into their everyday life. And so we strongly encourage people basically to use these tools, but we also strongly encourage people to change the way they think about their life from the point of view of the health of their brain, and live life a little more reliably to the advantage of their brain.
For sure. And just to make just to make it clear, could you give an example of so like living a physically good life? I think people can get their head around that. But what does it mean to live a good brain life, so to speak? In if you could just make examples.
Life of continuous learning. You need a life of continuous learning. You need a life in which you're elaborating the skills and abilities that constitute your repertoire in life. You have to think of the operational person that you are. You want to be a growing person. You don't want to be a contracting person. You want to be sustaining your abilities to a high level at anything that's important to you. Any hobby that you have, any activity that you're engaged in, you want to basically be continuing working on a path of progressive improvement or advance. But you also want to be elaborating those abilities. You want to take up new ones. You want to take up new activities. You want to get out, and not just as it relates to your mental life, but also how your brain is, in a sense, is controlling your physical actions. So there's a million ways that you can engage your brain to change in ways that contribute to its liveliness, to its vitality. And you know when you're vital mentally, you know when you're really alive. And it's all about being really alive in your mental actions and in your operations and in the control of your physical actions.
Right.
That's the goal.
Right. As I mentioned before, I did an episode with Bobby Stoyanovsky, who is he's working for Adrian Owen's lab, and according to him, he said that like when you do a brain training, according to him, like when you do a brain training program, according to him, then you get better on the things that you do, but then nothing else.
Right.
So in other words, that the training doesn't really transfer to other abilities or other like real life things, so to speak. Right. What do you say to that?
Well, Adrian Owen did a classic experiment in which he organized a study that's played out across the BBC, in which people were engaged in, thousands of people, 16,000, 17,000 people engaged in brain training. And then they evaluated the consequence of this by them doing assessments that were automatized. And they found this is the outcome they found. And I only have two things to say about it. The first is that, first of all, people didn't train very much, because even though a lot of people enrolled, they weren't engaged very much. Brain exercise, like physical exercise, takes a certain amount of effort, takes a certain amount of work. You have to be in there. You have to do something over a significant period of time. The change is not automatic, and big changes don't occur in short periods of time. It takes an effort. But more than that, what they primarily demonstrated is that it is possible to create a, quote, brain training exercise that's not effective. And they demonstrated that quite beautifully. So that it's meaningless. First of all, the science that demonstrates that when you engage the brain in the right way, the brain changes its machinery. It changes its basic operational characteristics, is undeniable. And every way you use a brain that has been so altered, so refined, is empowered by it. Every way, including all kinds of aspects that relates to its health. So saying it doesn't generalize, that there's not general benefit to exercising your brain, it's like saying that there's not a general generalization to exercising your body. It's nutty. But what does matter, absolutely, Andre, is the form of the exercise matters. The form of the exercise matters. You have to exercise your way in the brain in ways that basically drive change in a positive direction. Remember, there are rules. And the rules basically define how the brain will change as a function of engagement. You have to follow the rules. So when you do that, you demonstrate all sorts of extended changes. For example, you can change the brain. You can drive, and these are very beautifully established studies. You can train the brain for 10 hours. And when you train the brain for 10 hours, you can evaluate the ability of the person in a certain way to operate in the real world as a driver of an automobile. Okay? And after 10 hours of training, if the person has an older brain, over 60 years of age, the number of driving accidents they have over the next 10 years will be cut at least in half. Well, that's called a real world benefit by not much training. Now, if in a year later, after you train that person, you give them an hour of additional training or two, and then maybe a year later you give them another hour or two, and then you look over the next 10 years, so they've had a total of maybe 14 hours, 13 hours, 12 hours of training on a computer. And then you look over the next 10 years, you see that you've actually reduced the probability that they would move forward to dementia almost by half. Very little effort and a tremendous positive benefit to them in their brain health. Now, this isn't surprising to us because we know that when you change the brain by this kind of strategy, you change all of these operational characteristics of the brain. There's very few examples of more magnificent generalization of consequence in a brain than this. So Adrian Owen made a big mistake in confusing the fact that all brain training is not the same. And several people have made this mistake. When brain training is brain science based and when it follows the rules and understands what the principles are for driving change in a healthward direction, of course there's great generalization. So I'm sounding maybe a little bit too forceful in this, but obviously it's a pet peeve of mine because
yeah, no worries.
The reason it's that I'm speaking so forcefully about it is that I think that this is one of several examples in which people have been given very bad advice in ways that have impacted their health. Because basically encouraging people to do things they should obviously do to sustain or to improve their health is destructive if that information is not good information. And I think this is an example of that.
Right. Like, if I could just continue on the same track, even though you're quite clear on where you stand is, like, how much evidence is there? How much evidence is there for transfer from brain training to real life, like the example you just made with the cars, for example? How much?
We've supported about 150 roughly random assigned control trials with BrainHQ. So this is, a very, very large number of studies, several times more than any other brain training effort. This is over and over and over again. Almost every one of these trials has some evaluation of the extensions in generalization to untrained aspects of you could say, everyday or natural behavior. And every time that is done, virtually every time that is done, you see evidence of generalization. So, and often on a large scale. So it depends. There's an incredible number of things you could measure about how this might impact a real life. So it's a little bit complicated. But we see collectively there's a very, very large body of evidence that demonstrates that if you train the brain in the right way, brain health is improved, and all of these consequences occur. So, you look at general things like what are the medical expenditures of a person and things that relate to the brain over the subsequent period, post-training period. what are the overall medical expenses of the person of it? So how often do they go to the doctor? It's very substantially reduced. How effectively does the person sustain their independence? Very effectively altered. All of these things that relate to how brain training affects everyday life have been measured over and over again, and virtually always change in a positive direction. So I don't know. This is, I think, beyond argument that there is generalization, that you are changing the brain in a general way. And then you witness these changes in the brain physically and functionally. You see them in the brain of the trained human subjects. So you know that it's changed in ways that's operational. It's changed in its connectivity. So an example is you can train the brain. Beautiful studies were conducted at the University of Rochester in New York in the United States in training the brain of individuals that are in a pre-dementia condition called mild cognitive impairment. And in this brain, you see all of these places in which the brain basically is retracting in its connectivity. It's no longer connected. The big areas of the brain in the normal way, it's weakening in all of its operational connections. The right roadmap of connections is greatly compromised. And now you train the brain. A relatively limited period of training, about 30 hours. And now you see the brain is reconnected. In almost every place that connections were abnormally weakened, they're strengthening again. And the brain that is changed physically in this dramatic and extended way, there's just no question that this will impact almost every way this brain is engaged. That's important to the individual that owns it. So, this is really beyond arguing about anymore. What's critical is the training be in the right form. And BrainHQ is an example it represents an expression of the strategy by which these training is in a something close to the best form.
Right. I think perhaps we could go over to the effects of brain training. The audience here is a little bit younger, so I was thinking perhaps that we could talk about what would the benefits be for, let's say, a 35-year-old. If a 35-year-old would do brain training for, let's say, for their entire life, if we could start with that, what benefits would that person? What benefits would that person see if we started at 35 and continuously did it until they passed away?
Well, that's a great question. And first of all, you'd expect them to be better at whatever they do that's important to them. For example, on the job. So you can we've trained people on the job in all kinds of jobs, and they're better at the job. We train people that work in the design group of major electronic companies, manufacturing, engineering centers. We train people that work in banking. We train people that work in policing. We train people that work out in physical jobs out in the world. They're all better at the job, and also they're generally safer in the job because they're more alert, they're more alive, they're more on the ball than they would be if they were not in a brain healthy state. But everyone should be thinking about managing their brain health. I mean, all kinds of things happen in a life in which you want a brain that's resilient and healthy and strong. And also everyone should be managing their brain health because they want to continue to grow their abilities so that their life will be extended in physical fact, but also extended from the point of view in living to the end of the physical life with their neurological capacities intact. And you want to increase the probability that you'll have a long, extended, happy life. Obviously, growing your abilities, you're also growing your positive self-appraisal, and you're growing your positive interactions with other people in life. I mean, one of the things you want to focus on in developing your abilities as you move forward in life is how you're relating to other people. on the social cognition and social control side of your life, of course. So, it's a path to a stronger, more effective, more accomplished and happier and safer older life. So why wouldn't you do it? Why wouldn't you take on the lifelong task of managing your brain health? So what I recommend to people is that you give yourself a performance check relatively often, a time or two a year. You know what? Your doctor could do this, but doctors just don't do this. You go to the doctor and the doctor says, well, Andre, how are you doing? And you say, well, I guess I'm okay. Well, you've just had your annual brain exam. There is no brain medicine. And everyone should understand this. There is no brain. Brain medicine is disaster control. The only time the doctor acts is when there's a disaster in place in your skull. You can't control yourself, call it a psychiatric illness, or something is changing physically in your brain. We call that a neurological disaster. Comes in about 20 different forms. But the point is that there is no maintenance of the healthy integrity of your brain. And so you have to take this on yourself. And do this by basically calibrating yourself, calibrating your operation. How vital are you? How lively are you? How effective are you? How fast are you? How reliable are you? How competitive are you in complex operational skills? And if you're not, and you want to sustain those abilities to a high level to the end of your life on the planet, why not? Why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah,
so,
it's a good point. But do you believe that? Do you believe? I mean, doing a study of a 35-year-old until they die. I mean, that takes quite a long time. But do you believe that?
No. I mean, it's just you build it into your life, Andre. It's just part of your life.
Yeah.
You say, well, what am I? I mean, it's my life full of the habit-based operations in which I'm hardly ever thinking about what I'm doing, in which I'm. Is everything that I do in the domain of the familiar and the easy? Do I seek a life of leisure, and do I seek a brainless life? Am I going to live life like a living zombie? Which a lot of people do. Just walk down the average street in Stockholm and look at people. And what you see passing on the street are a host of living zombies.
Yeah, especially perhaps especially in Stockholm. I don't know, or maybe just all the big cities. Maybe I don't know. But do you believe that? Let's say that. I mean, if a person would be doing the brain training, I mean, of course, what you're saying is that we shouldn't be doing. I mean, we should do brain training as a second alternative. Perhaps we should continue to learn and everything. But if a person would be doing the brain training continuously, do you think that the person we would see the same effects as in the super mice that your colleague did or the other scientists did? That the brain of a perhaps 70 or 80-year-old would be like a, I don't know, 50-year-old or 60-year-old?
No, well, we do see that you can recover some abilities like brain speed. We've conducted studies in which we trained a large group of people and looked at what's called processing speed in the brain. And processing speed is basically a fast brain has to be a physically advanced brain. And you can actually recover the ability of the average 75-year-old so that it looks like the brain of the average 35-year-old. But so you can see dramatic effects. And actually in BrainHQ, we in almost all of the basic abilities that we train, we look at the comparison after training of the performance of the individual at those skills and abilities to the performance of the average untrained 20-year-old. And in most skills and abilities, the trained older person is, like say 75-year-old is equal to or better than the average untrained 20-year-old.
Right. Right.
So you can drive the brain broadly back to a much higher performance level by engaging it in training. And this does matter because the only way you can be really accurate or fast or effective in your operations, make few mistakes, is if you're actually changing the brain physically and functionally and chemically. That's the only way you can get there.
Yeah.
So we know that it's having important consequences in the brain that will matter to the person.
Yeah.
But beyond being in the using BrainHQ like exercises, just when you're out in the world, think of your life out in the world as being more like a child again, where you're continually learning, where you're continually paying attention to what's happening, where you're living in the world, where you're smelling the roses again, where you're paying attention to the details of it, where you're acquiring information about it again, where you're trying to understand it again, where you're using new tools in it again. That's really what you want to do. You want to be you want to be in lively engagement with the physical world. Now, what's happening to a large extent in the modern life is we're withdrawing from that. We're sitting with our device. We're doing these highly repetitive things. The only thing where we're translating our thoughts into our actions is through our fingers. We're doing relatively little in the translation of what we're receiving in information by any physical action in our body at all, and certainly not beyond our little robotic arms and hands. And so, this is a very, very limited way to engage your brain in life, and it's very habit-ridden and very, one of the analogies I like to use, Andre, is that you can take the most complicated video game, and you can find the average autistic child and introduce them to them, and they can become a master at it. And then they will stand up and turn around and face the world again, and they're autistic. And they're autistic because the world is full of wonders and surprises that are unexpected and that don't follow the rules. And you want to be a master of that world. You want to be a truly accomplished individual in that world. And not a rule-bound, habit-driven, habit-limited individual.
For sure. I was also thinking about just about brain training for those that are interested. Like, what is if somebody would do the brain training on BrainHQ, how many minutes per week would you recommend, and perhaps a program as well? How many different types of games or programs, whatever you would like to call it? Just a little bit of information for those that would be interested in doing brain training.
Well, there's a rich variety of ways that you can do it that would be useful, and so there are people in need. So, about the majority of us across the course of our life have things that befall us. We develop some condition that neurologically impacts us. We have some health crisis that neurologically impacts our brain. So this is a very common thing that happens in a life. And this is almost always a call to action. And that call to action could very, very justifiably lead us to go to the brain gym, among other things that we might do. So, but then and that would be more serious, you could say, and justify a stronger and more intensive effort. Maybe a half an hour a day across the 5 weekdays would be a reasonable schedule if I've just been identified as a person that's got to live with MS, or I bet I've gone through a period of cancer treatment and that's left me with a chemo brain, or maybe I've had a small stroke, or maybe I've had some other challenge in my life from a psychiatric side of my life. And so in that instance, when your brain is challenged, that is in some way that's obvious to you, it's important that you try to pay attention to its health and try to put yourself in a restorative direction that's with some substantial energy. Now, if I'm just maintaining myself, and I see that in my calibration of how I'm doing, I'm basically not satisfying myself from the point of view of my operational abilities, and I question my brain health, then basically 15, 20 minutes a day across the period of time, maybe you could go across a spurt of time of 2 or 3 or 4 months, and basically you can see how things are changing in your brain. You sense it, you see it in your actions, you see it by calibration. And on BrainHQ itself, you can calibrate your performance against every other person that's ever used it of your age in the world, which is many, many hundreds of thousands of people. And so basically, whether you're improving in a way that's satisfactory to you, or that meets your goals, that meets your aims. So every time you use BrainHQ, basically you're measuring your performance abilities. So across time, you can see whether or not you've improved it in a way that satisfies you and that meets your standards and goals.
For sure. That's some really good advice, I think, for people who are interested. And I would also like to mention before we end the conversation that you've also written a book about this. So if somebody would be interested in reading about this, it's called Soft Wired, and of course BrainHQ that we've been talking about. But except for that, do you have any tips if somebody would like to learn about perhaps brain plasticity in a simple way? Perhaps web pages or I don't know, YouTube or whatever, or interested in brain training, the science of that in a good way. Do you have any?
There are many things out there now. I said an old time favorite of mine is a book which is written by Norman Doidge called "The Brain That Changes Itself."
Yeah.
And Norman Doidge who's a Canadian neurologist, has written several really interesting books about you could say the powers of plasticity. That tell sort of provide compelling examples of the capacity of a brain to change itself, and sometimes in a really marvelous way, as a function of how the person has used or engaged it. And it really makes you wonder why people could ever have believed, as they believed en masse 40 years ago, that the brain was not continuously plastic.
Yeah.
I mean, Andre, when we began doing these plasticity-related experiments, the overwhelming belief was that brain could only really change physically and functioning when you're a very small child.
Yeah.
And when you Deutsch's examples were out there, even across that period, but no one paid enough attention to them, as they did not pay enough attention to the physiological psychologists in the world who were also doing compelling experiments that said that this conception that the brain couldn't change when you're older was just wrong. It's just wrong.
Yeah.
So everyone should get over the fact that brain change, physical brain change, is something that's only good for a small child or a baby. Your brain can change. Your brain can change for the better. Every brain can change for the better. And once you understand this, and once you understand that you're in charge of your brain changing, for the better or for worse, not taking this seriously, and not seeing this as a basic consideration for how you might rethink about how you're living your life, you're making a mistake. This is one of the great advances that relates to human health in the last and this century. So take advantage of it. Take advantage of it. Take advantage of it on the path to having a better life, using your time on this planet Earth in a stronger and better way. Why wouldn't you do that?
I mean, I watched some of the talks that you've done and some of the things that you've done, and I can really feel the genuine strive to be able to make people's lives better.
Right. Well, that's what it's about, and that's my own life's mission, and I'm trying to do that, and I hope people do take this message to heart.
For sure.
Fun to be with you, Andre.
Yeah, same. Big thank you for coming on again.
You're very welcome.
Hope you enjoyed the episode. Friends, I really need your help. I'm trying to get the podcast out there. So I was wondering if you could help me by leaving a positive rating and a review on your Apple device or the podcast player that you're using, as well as subscribing to the podcast. That really helps getting the show more visible on iTunes and other players. And if you don't know how it's done, then YouTube has a lot of great videos, so you can search there. All right, that's it. Take care. This podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, including the giving of medical advice. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.